All right, so first of all labor has dignity. And I think if you're here, you believe that. No matter who you are and what you do, no matter where you punch a clock or bring that paycheck home, you deserve a living wage. But for decades now, wages have been stagnant. Today, 1/3 of working Wisconsin punches the clock to bring home a paycheck of less than $20 an hour. That's not just some random number we picked or took the inflation adjusted number for the fight for 15, which by the way would actually be $22 an hour today. According to MIT researchers, $20 an hour is the bare minimum a person, a single adult, just one person needs to get by in all 72 counties of Wisconsin. 800,000 working Wisconsinites make less than a subsistence wage, 1 out of every 3 of us. Now, Wisconsin used to be a high wage state. When half the working class punched a clock in factories and foundries making autos, agricultural equipment, working in paper plants, packing houses. I can alliterate a lot more of these, but for brevity, I'll stop there. When half of us worked in jobs where union density was near universal, Wisconsin was a high wage state. Now those jobs are gone. And thanks to NAFTA, WTO, China PNTR, financialization, monopolization, they've been replaced by an explosion of low wage, no benefit, part-time, contingent, no rights, no respects, non-union jobs in the service sector, notwithstanding folks like Troy organizing to beat that back. It's bartenders, it's baristas, it's cooks, it's CNAs, it's hotel housekeepers, it's home health aides, it's Walmart workers, warehouse workers at Amazon. 7 of the 10 fastest growing jobs in Wisconsin, 14 of the 20 fastest growing jobs in Wisconsin pay less than $20 an hour, less than a living wage. We're a low wage state in a low wage nation. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of this work. In fact, it is, as Troy said, essential. The truth is, these are the jobs that exist and are going to be here. What's wrong is the wages that the bosses are getting away with paying us. We don't really miss the jobs we've lost so much as we miss the pay, the benefits, the middle class living standards, and the American dream. And they are gone too. And if we don't organize and fight, we're not going to get them back either. We're getting screwed. And those at the top are taking it from us. Let me flip this slide here. I'm not going to rely on a lot of charts, but this one and the next two are big. The share of national income going to labor, to worker wages, has literally never been lower. It's 1/5 below that what it was in the 4 decades when we built the world's first mass middle class. At the same time, the share of national income returning to capital, to corporate profits, has never been higher. It's 2.5 times larger than the heyday of our shared prosperity economy. And it's not because there's something wrong with any of us. We're the most skilled, educated, and productive workforce in the history of these United States. Labor share of national income down 20%. Corporate profits up 2.5 times. Wages stagnant. Living standards eroding. Middle class decimated. Income and wealth inequality skyrocketing. It did not happen by accident. And it wasn't magic. None of this is a coincidence. These things are causally related. This is a story of power. It's a story of labor market bargaining power. It's a story of how our democratic republic constructs political economy, shapes markets, and for whom. It's a tale of 2 political economies, the New Deal order and the neoliberal order. So let me take you back to the New Deal transition from the Gilded Age of laissez-faire political economy, robber barons, labor smashed, the money power and monopoly power and control and living standards for working people crushed under the weight of an income inequality economy. Sound familiar? There was this burst of working class populist reform that demanded an unrigging of the system to govern our political economy on behalf of the common man and woman and for the common good. The architects of our New Deal made a very deliberate choice. They wanted to balance the power in labor markets between the boss class and the working class. Not all in one direction of the boss class, but balanced. And they did that so that as the economy grew, that wealth would end up mostly in the hands of working people. So while they governed with a comprehensive program on economic power, like breaking up the big banks and taking on Wall Street, busting up monopolies, New Dealers recognized the primacy of labor markets, not just for the purposes of constructing and managing political economy, but also to rebuild our republic from one of corporate domination into one of a popular democracy. The people shall rule. Labor markets are the one where the commodity happens to be human beings, our time, our talent. It's the one market where sellers actually have to be there. We need to sell our labor to survive. So New Dealers understood that employers had all the power in the market because sellers had to be there and buyers could name their price. And that was poverty wages. So don't let some economist or like a dweeb with a chart waving it around insist that, well, Econ 101 says this, that, or the other nonsensical thing. Prices are political, and that includes wages. Yes, they're about the law of supply and the law of demand, but prices and wages are a function of which market participants hold power. So that's the most important thing policymakers can do. It's to decide how we construct markets, to determine who has power. That's what New Dealers did. And they legislated, governed, and acted to balance power in labor markets through twin policies that gave rise to the first middle class, the most dynamic and prosperous economy on the face of the planet that actually shared the fruits of labor with those who created the wealth, working people. First, they legislated that the policy of the United States is to foster and promote collective bargaining as a fundamental good. That is actual language from the statute. They wanted to foster and promote unions. So millions of us in basic industries and beyond, nearly half of the working class organized and built unions, benefited from union contracts for the next 40 years. And second, along with that, these two went together. New Deal policymakers established a rising floor on the labor market to bring everyone else along with those gains from union contracts. FDR himself and the architects of the minimum wage intended it to be a rate that you could make a living on and for it to shape the labor market for all of us. So they designed, and for decades, they managed the minimum wage in relationship to median wages and productivity growth. Unions won higher pay, set the standard, and along with that, the floor rose to bring along all workers. So as productivity, output, and wealth increased labor, we took our share. So for 40 years, we made sure workers had economic power, we made work pay, the middle class grew, our shared prosperity economy boomed. But then in the late 1970s, the boss class and the big banks and Wall Street and the 1%, they got together and they decided they were done with constraints on their economic power. They broke through because, frankly, too many Democratic Party politicians abandoned the playing field of political economy. Some outright switched teams. The Democratic Party lost its populist soul, foregoing its governing analysis and vision and agenda, focused on economic power. So without this populist Democratic Party standing in their way, the bosses and the financier class rigged the system through the political process. They funneled wealth away from working people, the wages that we were earning, and they funneled it towards corporate profits. That's why that split in the chart happened. They gutted labor laws and stopped reform. Starting in the Carter administration, every single president in Congress, Democrat and Republican alike, has failed to modernize our labor laws. And actually, they've allowed activist judges and bureaucrats to eviscerate the intent and effect of those labor laws. It's actually arguably worse today for private sector workers than the time before the New Deal that legalized unions. So it's no wonder we only represent 10% of workers, 6% in the private sector. It's damn hard to raise standards in a contract these days, isn't it? And it's even harder to organize workers in new workplaces. Those plutocrats and the politicians carrying water for them all but ended the minimum wage. They stopped adjusting it as a policy of economic power that impacted all workers and transformed it into a poverty wage by simply doing nothing. Policymakers abandoned the original intent of the minimum wage and its historical, practical, effective role in the labor market. It's not that it's been 17 years since the minimum wage has gone up, it's that it's been since the early 1970s since it set a floor on the labor market that impacted all of us. 50 years. It's not that $7.25 or $12 or $15 an hour isn't enough. It's that the minimum wage is functionally zero right now because it does not impact what happens in the labor market power structure. And in case any of you are, minimum wage increasing with fill in the blank heads like I am, I can quote these numbers to you all day long. I promise you I won't. Okay, I lied. I'm going to do some of them. If policymakers had actually kept minimum wage up with its relationship to median wages, it would actually be $21 an hour today. If it had grown with productivity, it would be $25, $26 an hour. If it had grown with the increase in CEO pay or corporate profits, $33 an hour. So researchers at the Rand Corporation, not exactly your radical anti-capitalist outfit, ran the numbers on the impact of politicians abandoning the New Deal political economy. They found that the dramatic shift in bargaining power to bosses instead of workers cost us $79 trillion. $79 trillion with a T. 12 zeros, that's right, with a T. That number is so large, it is quite literally for the human mind unfathomable. So I'm gonna make it plain for you. That's $28,000 per year in lost income as of 2023. The politicians governing our political economy and deciding on who has market power took $28,000 a year from you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Not you, Will. I kid.
Do you think it's gotten better since Trump took over?
It's absolutely I'm sick of winning, frankly. So how different would your life be with $28,000 more per year? Would you struggle with rent, buying a house, paying property taxes? Would your trips to the grocery store get a little bit easier? Would the We Energies bill hit so hard, or the price of gas? Could a $28,000 a year raise mean that you could save for retirement or take a vacation, miss a day of work, or otherwise live a more decent and dignified life? They've taken that from us, the politicians and the bosses, and we've let them. But we're here today because we're not going to let them continue the extraction of wealth and resources from the working class, taking it from us and funneling it upwards to the boss class. $28,000 per year is $13.46 per hour. Oh, I have more stats if you want me to go back to these things. I told you, the slides, this is not my thing. I promise we'll do better in the future. Oh, we got a little ahead. So $28,000 per year is $13.46 per hour. Do the math. I know some of you just did. Add that to $7.25 per hour. So $13.46 plus $7.25 per hour, that's about $20.71 per hour. That's about what the minimum wage should be right now. So when you understand the political economy of work and wages and labor market bargaining power, that's fundamentally what this is all about. It becomes pretty easy to deal with the objections that people make to raising wages. Now, stop me if you have heard some of these things like, oh, raising wages kills jobs. Show of hands, who's heard that one before? Okay, pretty much everybody. As early as the mid-1990s, we all know the Cardin-Krieger study, right? 1994. Economists who don't just stare into space theorizing or thinking about the theories of dead men, but the people who work with actual data found that raising wages had no adverse impact on employment. In normal people speak, raising wages doesn't kill jobs. In fact, they kept finding something that was strange, that when you raise wages, you might even see employment growth in low-wage sectors. Because it turns out if you give working people money, what do? We spend it. And that effect kept multiplying through the economy. So if you raise wages on a low-wage sector that was impacted, that tended to be where working people ended up putting money into. So the raising wages kills jobs crowd started to shift their arguments, and they said, oh, large wage increases, that's going to have adverse impact on employment. But yet again, every single credible study on large wage increases has found no adverse impact on employment, none whatsoever. You might have heard that Seattle and New York actually raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour over a decade ago. So we've had a lot of time to study this. Zero adverse impact on employment. In fact, employment in low-wage sectors, previously low-wage sectors, grew. California as well, they raised their minimum wage to $20 an hour for fast food workers. How much employment loss has there been? They studied it, and I promise I will not talk about wage elasticity here and the numbers. They show nothing, zero. I come prepared because a month or so ago, there was a book that came out by my favorite economist, labor market economist, I'm sure yours as well, Aaron Dubé. And yes, I had this on pre-order. And I got his new study that came out today on California. I could literally stack this podium with papers. They've reviewed the data for decades. There's no evidence to support the idea that raising wages kills jobs. Or even things like, you might have heard, if we raise wages, we're gonna have price increases. It's gonna cause inflation. If I hear that one more time, I swear to God, I'm like, lose my lunch or lose my mind, one of the two. Our friend, Professor Dubé, revealed some really fascinating research, focused on sectors of the economy that employ a lot of low-wage workers, food service, grocery, and retail. I'm gonna quote some numbers here to you. I should have been doing this, my bad. But I wanna walk you through this. By the way, that's the whole point of what I'm doing here, is to help you understand this in a way that's like, okay, normal people can get this. You don't need a PhD in economics. I certainly don't have one. What he found is that when there was a 10% increase in wage floors, that the price increases that could be observed were about 0.5% to a high of 1%. So if you had a wage floor of $10 per hour and you increase it to $11 per hour, a $10 item then in a store would increase about 5 cents to 10 cents. It's literally nickels and dimes that we're talking about when you just focus on low-wage industries. So if you raise the wage floor 1/3 using these figures, that would be a price increase that could be associated with it of 1.5% to 3%. We have an essential market wage floor right now of $14, $15 an hour. So if you raise the wage floor 1/3 on that to $20 an hour, a $10 item would increase about 15 cents. That's the most you could imagine that's going up. That's pretty different than, for example, 8 to 10% year over year inflation that we've been seeing, not to say anything about the massive increases we've seen in housing costs, healthcare, food and energy, the kind of costs that eat up the bulk of working people's household budgets. The last time that we had inflation like we've seen over the last few years, it may have been true that price increases and wage increases kind of reinforced one another. The last time we had this kind of thing happening in the 70s, severe sustained inflation, workers still had bargaining power. So if there was a supply shock that increased prices like in 73 or 79, workers could demand higher wages. And that would set off a wage price spiral. That is vastly different from the time in which we find ourselves here. Those days are long gone. Workers haven't had bargaining power in decades. We have not gotten big wage increases in decades. And the truth is, price increases over the last 5 years or so, since 2021, which have been really substantial and that keep on going up, weren't because you got a $13 or $14 an hour wage increase. It's been, surprise, surprise, a story of market power. Virtually every single industry today has become so consolidated that our markets are more concentrated and monopolized than in the era of Morgan and Mellon and DuPont, Rockefeller, and the great trusts. Prices, as you remember from me saying this before, are a function of market power. These days, monopolies have so much market power that they can dictate prices, and that is what is driving inflation. Input costs for every firm, like labor costs, will influence prices, but ultimately it comes down to market power. So if raising prices means greater profit, and they have the power to do so, they're gonna raise prices, and they have. Across the 40 years of our best study on this, corporations have built and used market power that has enabled them to triple the amount over input costs that they charge and run that right into profits. I tried to think of how to describe this kind of thing to people. So I'm gonna see if I can do this, and I would love your feedback. In 1980, corporations put 20% on top of their input costs to set prices, 20% over their marginal costs. Today, it's 60%. So we actually produce more, prices have gone up, and nobody here has seen a dime of wage increase come from those price increases. Corporations have pocketed that. They've tripled the amount that they've been increasing those prices over their costs. So raising wages doesn't increase prices. Corporate greed and the power to charge us more is what increases prices. And those two things have linked together, market power.
That doesn't seem fair.
John, you might be onto something here. We should talk to politicians about this. Monopolies driving price increases and inadequate wages and household income are basically the same problem with the same cause. Market power is tilted against us, determined by the governance of our political economy, chosen by elected policymakers. So who has market power? Who should have market power? Bosses, monopolies, big banks, Wall Street? Or should it be workers, producers, citizens? The question here is what direction political leaders will choose and what direction we the people are going to choose. So we've had the greatest natural experiment of political economy in world history to consult in shaping our choice, 2 40-year periods. We had 4 decades of the New Deal political economy organized essentially around labor market power, made work pay, gave rise to the world's first mass middle class, delivered shared prosperity. And then after that, we've had 4 decades of the neoliberal order that eliminated the mechanisms of market power for workers and put it back in the hands of bosses and corporate titans. Wages stagnant, living standards eroded, middle class destroyed, corporate profits higher than ever, robber barons richer than ever, and the greatest wealth and income inequality of our time. It's actually worse today than the Gilded Age that brought on the Great Depression. So which do you choose? What will we choose in our democratic republic? What will our political leaders choose? And almost as importantly is who will we choose to lead us? Those who are going to attack this income inequality economy and decimation of worker power with every fiber of their being, or the people who are just going to wave the boss class along, matadors to these bulls of corporate power. This is about market power, but functionally it's really about popular power in our democracy, how we impact politicians, who those politicians are. Raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour tomorrow, and half of working people in our state will get a raise. Half of us. I am not a politician, but I would think that raising wages for half of people in our state would be pretty damn good politics. Living wages are not just about some people over here, it's about labor market power for all of us. And that is what I hope you take out of this about why wages are what they are as much as anything else and why we are focused on raising the minimum wage to a living wage. At a time of a cost of living crisis, state policymakers have very little that they can do to impact household budgets. It's not really easy to address the cost side, but they definitely can address the revenue side by raising wages. And increasing the minimum wage to a living wage has now been a 2-to-1 issue in public opinion polling for well over a decade. It used to be that raising the minimum wage was like a 50% supported issue, 35% opposed it, when people were talking about 10, 12 bucks an hour. But the numbers would actually drop when you asked folks about raising the minimum wage to something more like a living wage. People supported doing nice things for poor people, but didn't think like those people deserve too much. Minimum wage was understood as something like a means-tested tax and transfer program in their minds, do-gooder liberalism, generally liked, supported in theory, but not really politicized and practiced. It wasn't seen as something that was part of a program to transform what's fundamentally wrong in our political economy. But sometime after Occupy Wall Street, sometime when the fight for 15 in a union took off, when Bernie Sanders started to become a national political figure articulating something very similar to this, there was this upsurge of working class populism that started building and taking to the streets, to the ballot box, and the halls of government. And something changed. The higher wage numbers went, the support levels in public opinion didn't degrade. In fact, raising wages dramatically became a supermajority issue. So we're not really calling for a little boost in pay for some people. We're demanding a living wage and a raise for all working people. This is about building a politics that will transform the landscape of our state and our country. We're not saying we want some kind of tax and transfer social program to compensate the losers in our market economy. We're telling you that we demand an unrigged market where power is balanced, where we can make our way with the dignity of work, with the kind of grit that defines all of us, whether it's blue collar, white collar, pink collar, no collar at all. We're talking about transforming the income inequality economy that holds all of us back. The income inequality economy that screws the producing people of America, the makers, and gives it to the takers, the bosses and the billionaires and the big banks. People support raising wages and restoring worker power pretty substantially. 70% of us support unions. The highest it's ever been since they've started tracking this number. 2/3 of people want unions and working people to have more power and corporations to have less power. There's never been a time with more dynamic political support for this kind of program. We don't raise wages and restore union rights once we get a majority in the legislature. This is the path to win a gubernatorial election and to take majorities in both houses of the legislature. People support these things, this kind of populist program of economic power that raises up all of us and is going to rebuild a New Deal middle-class society. And so we need to build a campaign and a project around it. The politicians and the parties that do want to win Wisconsin, gubernatorial election, 50 seats in the Assembly, 17 in the Senate, win some congressional seats, maybe even New Deal-style supermajorities. The folks who want to do this are going to grab onto this populist upsurge that we are building from urban and rural areas alike, and they'll clearly, coherently, credibly articulate this kind of analysis and vision for a working class populist program of political economy, taking on economic power, focused on living wages and legalizing unions. And they're going to stand with people like Angelina, Midwestern populists, and the literal millions of us who stand to benefit from this. So I'm going to wrap up here because I've been going on long enough, and I'd actually like us to talk. There are several more pages, but I know how to read a room. And John says, yeah, let's wrap it up. So if John tells me something, I do just want to say, look, today, 2026, looks a lot more like 1926 than it does to 1976. We've got inequality, robber barons, monopolies, big banks and Wall Street in charge of everything, unions without real power, workers struggling with low wages. But I do have the confidence that we have taken the fight to them before and beaten them and won and transformed the landscape in this country and in our state and in southeastern Wisconsin. I have the confidence that we'll do it again. That's why we're here tonight. And so after we do some Q&A and talking about this a little bit, we're going to finish up by talking finally about what you can do before you leave tonight and between now and November and going into January of next year to win living wages, to re-legalize unions, and to build this populist project to make our political economy work for working people once again.